This just into CBS Sports HQ. The NFL informing teams on this Thursday things will be strict when it comes to COVID and game cancellations this upcoming season. As in, if a game can't be rescheduled, get ready to forfeit. Pay the price. You're going to lose. Last season, if there was an outbreak on a team and a game couldn't be played, the NFL pretty much bent over backward to reschedule that game. If you remember, there were weeks when we had games on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Well, that will not be the case this season. Here's part of the memo that went out to teams. Quote, if a club cannot play due to a COVID spike in vaccinated individuals, we will attempt to minimize the competitive and economic burden on both participating teams. Every club is obligated under the Constitution and bylaws to have its team ready to play at the scheduled time and place. A failure to do so is deemed conduct detrimental. There is no right to postpone a game. Let's welcome in our NFL insider and writer, Jonathan Jones. So, JJ, as I mentioned last year, we saw some teams violating those COVID protocols. They then had an outbreak. We had postponements, rescheduling all over the course of the season. That won't be the case this season. Or if it happens, those teams need to get ready to pay the price.
That's exactly right, Amanda. And listen, these sort of postponements may happen because ultimately the NFL does want to play a full season. We saw them bend over backwards last year because if you don't play a game, then you don't get the product to your broadcast partners. Well, there's a lot of money tied up in that. And now this year, you've sold a whole bunch of tickets, theoretically, and so you don't want to have to pay those tickets back to fans. So there's a lot of money involved there and a lot of incentive to have these games played. Again, remember last year, the NFL was very, very close to that mythical Week 18. We remember that late Ravens-Steelers game there that had to be played on a Wednesday afternoon. That was probably the closest the NFL got. So they did a lot of bending, but never had to break necessarily. So it didn't happen last year. It may not have to happen this year, but if it does, the NFL is saying, hey, we're not going to be as nice about this as we may have been last year, back when we were in the throes of the pandemic before there was a vaccine available. And Amanda, on the topic of vaccinations, the NFL is now reporting that more than 75% of all players have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And in fact, half of the NFL teams, or just more than half of the NFL teams, have vaccination rates among their own clubs at 80% or greater, but we still know that there are a couple of teams that are lagging far, far behind. The Colts and the Washington football team are the two that as recently as a couple of days ago were among the lowest in the NFL. So that, specifically for those teams and other teams that are on that low end, that's something to watch for as we continue into training camp.
JJ, there seems to be a lot of gray space here. If we cannot postpone, then you're going to have to forfeit. Well, how much effort are they going to put into rescheduling these games? Are we talking no effort whatsoever if there's an outbreak? Are they going to have to look at the situation? What are you thinking?
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of effort. What they're saying in this memo is if you're the Denver Broncos and you have a position catastrophe and you have to start Kendall Hinton, the wide receiver, at quarterback, same deal as last year. You're just going to have to start Kendall Hinton at quarterback. And, you know, they're going to try to move some things, you know, and I'm just guessing here, but it's an educated guess from if it's a Sunday game and you have an outbreak, that we're going to move it to a Monday. But are we going to see Wednesday afternoon games in the middle of the season? I don't know if that's going to be the case. I don't know if they're going to move bye weeks around for teams, especially teams that didn't have an outbreak. There's only going to be so much that I think the league is going to be willing to do in scenarios like this because, again, we all lived through this last year, and one of the NFL's kind of key phrases was, it takes all of us. And, well, you know, that meant a number of things. But as it related to the global pandemic, we're all sort of in this together. And so we heard many times last season, Amanda, the team that didn't have the outbreak was saying, well, it's not fair that we have to move the game or we have to change our bye week. But that's what we were all in. That's what we had to deal with in the entire NFL community. Now I think this year there's going to be maybe a move of a day, maybe a Tuesday night game, but anything talking about a Wednesday afternoon game like what we saw once last season, I don't think that's going to be on the table in 2021.
All right, our NFL insider Jonathan Jones there breaking down the COVID rules when it comes to the NFL this upcoming season. Definitely more strict than it was last season as well. Also want to mention there's a financial aspect of all of this. If a team does eventually have to forfeit, they will be responsible for those financial losses. So by the way, training camp, if you didn't know what's going on right now for teams across the country, your training camp tour continues here on CBS Sports HQ. Next Tuesday, we begin with the Steelers.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.